Good evening there, everybody. What is happening? Hopefully, y'all are having a wonderful day today. So, when it comes down to it, I thought, of course, that I would talk about this little video and this subject that I found to be very particularly interesting. And this, of course, is going to be a conversation and a video reviewed by that of Mr. Dante's Boxing Nation. And the reason why I like to review Dante's Boxing Nation is because Dante's Boxing Nation is such a prime example of what a lot of fanboys and what a lot of sports fans and what a lot of racialized over emotional fans really love to do whenever it comes to a certain debate in sports, especially within that of the sport of boxing, because of course that is pretty much the only sport that he mainly talks about here. But of course, for those of you that have been around sports for a very long time, especially during my generation, because I'm 26 years old, if you've seen certain debates, you know that what people like to do is that for one of the arguments about who is debatably greater, or if you're talking about a conversation about who is the better athlete of that time, or who is the greater athlete, or who is the greatest of all time, or maybe the number one person in the sport. One debate that people will always try to do is that they'll try to uplift their favorite athlete's competition to try and make it better than what it actually probably is, while in return with the person that they're debating against, or the athlete that they're debating against, to try and make their favorite athlete look better, they'll try to decrease or degrade their level of competition. And for example, for those of you that have seen this firsthand, you realize that, of course, with the Michael Jordan and LeBron James debate, which in my view really isn't much of a debate, I believe that Michael Jordan is pretty much greater in almost every single category. But you know that, of course, that if you grow up in my generation, which was the LeBron James generation, throughout the 2010s and early 2020s, that what they'll try to state, the LeBron James fans, what they'll try to tell you is that LeBron James, that, he didn't have enough help the same way that Michael Jordan did, and that, he faced way greater teams in the finals, and that they were way more talented and all sort of bullshit. And, he beat the greatest team of all time in 2016, blah, blah, blah. And all those points are really a bunch of horse shit. But, it is what it is. That's one of the things that they'll do to try and put LeBron James on the same level or above Michael Jordan, when in reality, he's not on that level. It just is what it is. And for those of you, of course, that watch other sports, for example, for those of you that watch tennis, throughout the Big Three era, the era that I grew up in, when it came to Roger Federer, when it came to that of Rafael Nadal and Novak Djokovic, what the Fadal fans, or what Nadal and Federer fans, overall will state, of course called the Fadal fans, what they'll state is that Novak Djokovic cannot be remembered as the greatest of all time because he started facing and beating Rafael Nadal and Roger Federer when they were no longer at their absolute peak, which of course is bullshit because when Novak Djokovic finally hit his peak in 2011, Rafael Nadal and Roger Federer not only were still competing for Grand Slams, but Roger Federer would have been like 32 to 33 years old, and Rafael Nadal is only 1 year older than Novak Djokovic. He would have been about 28 to 29 years old. So once again, people try to tell you this bullshit. And of course, they also try to make the point that Novak Djokovic, that he faced, the weakest era of tennis and all this sort of stuff, that he faced a watered down version and an era of tennis, which has always been horseshit because Novak Djokovic actually played in debatably the most competitive tennis era, of all time in the early 2010s to mid 2010s. Not only with Roger Federer and Rafael Nadal, but Stan Wawrinka and Andy Murray and a couple of other guys, Martin Del Potro, some other guys like that. So once again, people always try to tell you this shit in order once again to make their debate look clearer, or look better. And that's one thing that I don't usually like in sports debating, especially when someone is being disingenuous or when they don't keep the same standards. And the reason why I wanted to talk about this is because Dante's Boxing Nation and a few other guys, they're talking about this up and coming Terence Crawford versus Israil Madrimov fight. And even though I think that this is possibly a tough fight for Mr. Terence Crawford, I'm not going to go as far to state that Israil Madrimov, in my view, is a clear A grade level fighter because I don't really know how good this man is. Now, I would state that maybe he's about on the A minus level, but Dante's Boxing Nation and some of these other guys are trying to compare him to be the next Gennady Golovkin. He's not Gennady Golovkin. Gennady Golovkin at one point in time was looked at as one of the top 5 pound-for-pound fighters in the world. He almost won every single title in his weight class, and by the time he fought Canelo Alvarez, I believe that he had about 30 plus fights in that weight class and was clearly looked at as the boogeyman and the best fighter in the middleweight division. So once again, Dante's Boxing Nation and some of these other guys, They're trying to make this potential win for Terence Bud Crawford look that much bigger than what it actually is. And don't get it twisted. I'm not stating that, in my view, that this is not a good win and that Madrimov is a bum. I'm not going to state that. But I'm also not going to state that Israil Madrimov is the next Gennady Golovkin, because the man only has 11 total fights, and I really don't know how good this man is. And are we really sure that this man would beat the other champions in the weight class? Are we really sure that he would beat Sebastian Fondura? Are we really sure that he would beat, a potential Tim Tszyu or a Virgil Ortiz or even Jermell Charlo or Brian Castano if he ended up coming back? There's a possibility that he could beat some of those guys, but we don't know that yet. So I just find it very interesting, once again, who Dante really tries to promote overall, depending, on who the fighter is. Because let's be real, if this were Canelo Alvarez or someone else that was not one of his favorite black American fighters, all he'd be stating is that they're going on the European tour. That's all he'd be stating. But anyways, let's get into it. Let's see what Mr. Dante's Boxing Nation has to say.
Dante's Boxing Nation, what's going on, guys? So we are only a couple of weeks away from the best fighter in the world, Terence Crawford, moving up to another weight class, fighting against very dangerous champion, Israil Madrimov. Madrimov, he's in tremendous shape training for this fight. He's an aggressive, intelligent power puncher from Uzbekistan. And he's a switch hitter just like Terence Crawford. And when you include the fact that Terence Crawford is 36 years old and he's moving up in weight, that makes this a serious challenge. There's a reason why David Benavidez did not look like a Mexican monster when he moved up to 175. And mind you, he wasn't fighting someone on the caliber of a Madrimov. Terence Crawford.
Well, two things right there. First of all, how do we really know how good Madrimov actually is? And Vozdik is not really quite the same caliber anymore because his soul was taken against Artur Beterbiev. No fighter is ever the same after they fight Artur Beterbiev. He just puts them through way too much punishment and way too much turmoil, and they're never the same again after that. So that's what I also was stating, that Vozdik has not been the same ever since he lost to Beterbiev. There's a reason why he retired for about 3 years, I believe, after that. But, it is what it is. Anyways, but first of all, once again, we don't really know the caliber that Madrimov is on because he hasn't really fought anybody. It just is what it is, And once again, it's very interesting how with certain guys, for those of you that remember, that when Lomachenko was looked to only have about 12 fights on his record, even facing A-grade level champions, and people tried to debate him as the number one pound per pound. They said that he couldn't be up there because overall the amount of fights, and it was disrespectful. But they're trying to compare this guy to Gennady Golovkin. Isn't that interesting? But also another thing right there, you heard that little tidbit about David Benavidez, according to them. And once again, I've been telling people this for a very, very, very long time. The reason why they put so much stock and so much chips into that of David Benavidez is because they're using him to tear down that of a Mr. Solo Canelo Alvarez, but they don't ever believe that David Benavidez is ever going to be the true number one pound per pound fighter. They can pretend to you that they like certain fighters like Josh Taylor and David Benavidez and certain guys like that all they want to. They don't. They don't really care about those guys. They're only an ends to a mean, or a means to an end. That's all they are. All right, the reason why they were using Josh Taylor is because if he was going to move up in weight and fight Terence Bud Crawford, they knew more than likely that he was going to get his ass whooped and stopped, so they could say, wow, take a look at that. Crawford beat a real top 5 pound per pound fighter. That was really the only reason why they were claiming that Josh Taylor was up that high. And then when it comes to David Benavidez, what you notice is that he's not on the top 10 pound per pound list for them whatsoever. He's not on the top 10 pound per pound list because if Canelo Alvarez were to defeat David Benavidez, they would actually have to claim that he's debatably the number one pound per pound fighter if he's up there and defeating a guy that would be 20 pounds bigger than him and a guy that's a decent amount bigger than him in terms of, height, a dude that's 6'2". So once again, what Dante just told you there, if you know how to read in between the lines, he doesn't really believe that David Benavidez is ever going to be a true threat to the number one pound per pound spot or the throne. So he doesn't have to worry about David Benavidez in the long run. David Benavidez is perfect to put all his chips into because David Benavidez not only helps him in terms of tearing down Canelo Alvarez, but he's a guy that's never, in terms of his skill set, ever truly going to threaten the number one pound per pound spot because they don't believe that David Benavidez is ever going to beat Dimitri Bivol or Artur Beterbiev. They don't believe that he's going to beat either of those guys. So that's the reason, excuse me, why they put so much chips and so much stock with that of a David Benavidez. That's why they end up doing that.
He's moving up in weight to take.
Because whenever it comes to the non-black fighters that look like they could be potentially within that top range, they never ever put that much stock into them. If that's what you notice, Tyson Fury, Alexander Usyk, Inoue, Vasily Lomachenko, Gennady Golovkin, they never put any stock into those guys. They only put stock in the certain guys that are non-black fighters that look like they're going to be overall a non-potential threat.
Gone the most dangerous champion in the division right now. This is actually more of a dangerous fight than the Sebastian Fundora fight would have been. In fact, I believe this fight is going to be more difficult than the Errol Spence fight was for Terence Crawford. But then again,
well, shit, I hope so. If this fight isn't more difficult than the Errol Spence Jr. fight, then Israil Madrimov is going to get knocked out within about 4 rounds.
A lot of Terence Crawford's fights were more difficult than the Errol Spence fight was. The only difference is this fight is at a higher weight class. It's pretty ironic when you think about it, because if Terence Crawford wasn't black, old media would be talking about nothing but numbers. For example, if this was Lomachenko, they would be constantly bringing up his age, the fact that he's naturally the smaller man, and how many months he's been out of the ring. This is what they did as soon as the Haney versus Lomachenko fight was announced, and this is the same thing they're going to do when we get the announcement of Dante versus Lomachenko.
Right, but here's the thing, Mr. Dante's Boxing Nation. If you're going to bitch, moan, and complain about double standards, which I do agree with you, I agree that if it comes to a lot of those boxing fans, that if Terence Crawford was a different complexion, that they would be talking about him not fighting for a whole year and also him getting up there in age. And what I will state is this. Those are valid points. Terence Bud Crawford has not been in the ring for over a year. And on top of that, he is going to be turning 37 years old very soon. I believe it's September. So it's not like those points are not valid. But if you're going to bring those up with Terence Bud Crawford, you also should be bringing them up with Lomachenko and other fighters. And that's how you know that Dante's Boxing Nation, that instead of objectivity or logic on his channel, he's really using emotionality, because he's always trying to settle a score. Whenever someone's trying to settle a score, they don't bring up things on both sides. They only bring up things on one side, because their mindset is always, you didn't do this for us, so I'm not going to do it for you. And to a degree, somewhat, that energy is understandable. And sometimes in life, you are going to have to apply that energy, because why should you, overall apply a certain energy when they're not going to do that to you? But if you're going to claim yourself to be an objective and a logical commentator, then you have to hold yourself to a different standard. Dante's Boxing Nation does not. And once again, that's why you see here that he made the excuse for Terence Bud Crawford that he's getting up there in age, and that overall that he hasn't fought in a long time, but he didn't make it for Lomachenko. So it's very interesting.
They want to make excuses for the guy that they're rooting for, which is the foreigner, because they felt the American was going to win. Or in Javante's case, is going to win. But fighters on a...
I agree with you, Mr. Dante's Boxing Nation, but Lomachenko is going to be 37 years old, I believe, next February. So at the end of the day, once again, does that mean that Lomachenko's a grandpa if Gervonta Tank Davis defeats him? Because we all know what the narratives were when Mayweather defeated Canelo. You say all the time that Floyd Mayweather Jr. was 36 and that he was a grandpa and that he wasn't at his prime anymore. That's what I heard. And now you're stating with Terence Bud Crawford that he's also not in his prime anymore. So if you're going to use that for those two fighters because they're your favorite black fighters, no problem. But if you claim yourself to be an objective and a logical commentator, which for any of us that have intellect, we all know you're not, but it is what it is. But if you ever are going to claim yourself to be an objective and a logical commentator, you should be keeping the same standards.
Coincidental list,
and that goes overall for other people as well. For example, for the people overall that claimed that Lomachenko would beat Devin Haney, but then as soon as that fight was announced, you claimed all these excuses that Lomachenko was too old. You can't switch sides like that.
Terence Crawford, they don't get that luxury. It doesn't matter how old they are. It doesn't matter how small they are. If they lose, they just lost. And I believe Terence Crawford, he's aware of it.
I agree with you, Mr. Dante's Boxing Nation, but the thing is that you do the exact same shit, just with non-black fighters.
This, which is why he wants to put on
That's why Terence Bud Crawford is already top 5 to top 10 of all time with these guys, but then with certain fighters like Usyk or Inoue, he doesn't talk about them in an all-time great conversation. Inoue is already a 4-weight division champion, and all Dante's Boxing Nation says is that he's going to have to keep moving up the weight classes to prove how great he is, because that's what the all-time greats did. Inoue is a 4-weight division champion, and on top of that, he beat a guy that you said was going to completely outbox him. That's what you said, all right, to where Inoue didn't have much of a chance. But Inoue has to prove more of himself, because that's what the greats did, basically alleging overall that he's not a great. No, Inoue is a great, perhaps even an all-time great. But I do think overall that his resume is going to have to get expanded a little bit more for me to for sure give him that badge of all-time great.
Performance.
The all-time great fighters for sure of this generation are Terence Crawford, Alexander Usyk, and Canelo Alvarez. In a way, is very close also to that badge.
But we don't know how Terence Crawford's power is going to translate to a higher weight class. Because sparring with bigger guys in the gym with bigger gloves and headgear, it is nowhere near the same thing. Jermell Charlo and David Ben.
Well, listen, if Terence Bud Crawford is going to be remembered on the level of a Canelo Alvarez or an Alexander Usyk, he's going to have to win this fight. All right, it is what it is. Dante's Boxing Nation is making it sound like Israil Madrimov is like Canelo Alvarez or something. Israil Madrimov is a very decent fighter, but Israil Madrimov, once again, we don't know how good he actually is. And it's no offense against Israil Madrimov, but when I take a look at him fight, there are certain things in my view that in my view are a little bit left to be desired. I don't really find him to be the most of elite defensive fighters. He keeps his hands down quite a bit, of course, in order to get certain exchanges and to get certain counter punches. But you're dealing with a master level boxer in Terence Bud Crawford. You're dealing with a master level boxer in Terence Bud Crawford. So once again, overall, he's gonna have to be very careful. I don't see Israil Madrimov, in my personal view, making all 12 rounds if Terence Bud Crawford comes in from what I've seen from the Errol Spence Jr. fight. Now, if he's severely slowed compared to what he was last time, or clearly not the same fighter, then I might have to say, okay, you know what, the age has kind of finally got to him. But, once again, I expect Crawford to get the stoppage in this fight because Israil Madrimov, of course, people are going to talk about how big he looks in terms of girth and everything like that. It's pretty much going to even out because Terence Bud Crawford is a natural welterweight fighter. He rehydrates at about 160 plus, and on top of that, the man is going to have a 6-inch reach advantage over Israil Madrimov. A lot of people don't know that, but Terence Bud Crawford, he has a 74-inch reach. Israil Madrimov only has 68 inches of reach. So, once again, any weight advantage that Israil Madrimov is going to have, it's not really going to matter if Terence Bud Crawford is able to get to his punches first, which more than likely he's going to be able to. And on top of that, he hurts him consistently. So we'll see what happens.
Vitas, they can tell you that. This is why it takes a very, very special fighter to move up multiple weight classes and completely dominate the competition.
Agreed. So what are you saying about Mr. Jermell Charlo there, Mr. Dante's Boxing Nation? What you're claiming is that Jermell Charlo really was never on the level of a Crawford or a Canelo Alvarez, which means what? Basically the whole time that I was saying it, Jermell Charlo was never in the conversation as a top 5 pound-for-pound fighter, ever. Because not only did he never have the resume, he didn't have the skill set, he didn't have the dominance, he didn't have any of that. Once again, Jermell Charlo's a decent A- level fighter, but Jermell Charlo is not someone overall, once again, that I ever thought was ever going to defeat Canelo or Terence Crawford. He does not have that same boxing ability as those two guys. And a lot of people, of course, are going to say, oh, Jermell, he lost to Canelo so badly because of the weight. And the bullshit. Jermell Charlo is 5'11" to 6 foot. And on top of that, overall, he really should be fighting at 160 pounds anyway. He's bigger than everyone at 154 pounds anyway. And Canelo Alvarez really is not a natural 168 pounder. Now, if you want to talk about, a valid excuse, of course, we can bring up the fact that Canelo was already used to fighting bigger guys. And that, of course, it was a jump up in the weight. So, of course, it has to be a factor. But the size was not as much of a factor as people really are trying to lay it on. The thing is that Jermell Charlo never truly believed that he could beat Canelo. He didn't believe that he could beat Canelo. He didn't trust in his abilities. He didn't trust in his boxing IQ, nor in his boxing ability. And that's why he pretty much laid down at the press conference and treated Canelo Alvarez like Colonel Nathan R. Jessup in that movie, A Few Good Men. One of my personal all-time favorites, by the way, for a movie. But anyways, when it comes down to it, that's why he treated, Canelo Alvarez like a 5-star colonel. And he treated him overall with complete respect inside the ring and outside the ring. He was scared of that man.
Something else I thought about.
And he pretty much came in for a payday.
Madrimov that was pretty interesting. The fact that he's been in training camp with Dimitri Bivol. He helped Bivol prepare for the Canelo fight. And something tells me he probably did better against Bivol than Canelo did. So this
this man hates Canelo Alvarez's guts so much. Every single video that he does, he always has to mention this man Canelo Alvarez. And that's how you know who overall the true face of boxing, or who the main quote unquote great fighter actually is, or the great athlete is, because they can never stop talking about them. They can never stop bringing up their name in the conversation. Like, once again, if you take a look at basketball, LeBron James fans, for LeBron allegedly being the greatest of all time, they can never stop bringing up Michael Jordan. It's always something to do with Michael Jordan. They always have to detract him in some area because they truly know who the greatest of all time is. When it comes down to it, and when you take a look at tennis, not Rafael Nadal and Roger Federer fans, they always have to bring up Novak Djokovic because they realize that most people realize that he has a great debate. All right, that's why Dante always has to bring up Canelo Alvarez. He doesn't he doesn't talk about other fighters the same way that he talks about Canelo. He always has to try and detract from Canelo Alvarez because he realizes that a lot of people know that he has a great argument for one of the greatest fighters ever.
This is a big fight.
And of course, when you that little shot at Canelo Alvarez right there, Canelo was really not supposed to win that fight against Dimitri Bivol. Canelo is 5'7" with a 71-inch arm reach. Dimitri Bivol is about 5'11" to 6 foot. And he's a guy that is a natural light heavyweight fighter. Canelo was never really even supposed to be in the ring with Dimitri Bivol in the first place. All right, so it's just very interesting because what did we hear about Canelo and Dimitri Bivol? We heard that it wasn't the size that had Canelo Alvarez lose, but it was the skills, even though Canelo was probably outsized by about damn near 2 weight classes in that fight. But Terence Crawford, if he loses this fight, it's because of the size and all sort of bullshit. And don't get it twisted, it would be a little bit of a factor. But Crawford is going to have to win this fight if he's going to be remembered on the level of Canelo and Usyk. Because if he loses this fight, that is going to do a lot of damage to his career. But it's just very interesting overall what Dante is willing to do in terms of excuses overall and what he finds valid depending on the fighter.
This is a really big fight for Terence Crawford's career, and it's obviously the biggest fight of Madrimov's career. With that being said, I'm going to wrap this video up. That's all I got for now, guys. I'm on to the next one.
But anyways, that pretty much is about it for today. Thank you all so much for watching. We'll see where this goes. But what do I believe overall? What level of threat do I believe that Madrimov poses to Crawford? I think that he's better than most of the fighters that he fought at the welterweight class. I'll give him that. I think that he's better than Jeff Horn and Jose Benavidez and Aegis Velasquez. So I'd probably place him on the A- level. But to me, that doesn't really say much because it's no offense against Crawford, but people can bitch, moan, and complain all they want to. But other than about 4 fighters on Crawford's resume, really to be quite honest with you, really only about 2 confirmed ones. There's just really not that many A-grade level fighters on his resume. And had it not been for the Errol Spence Jr. win, people would still be criticizing Crawford's resume to a great degree. It just is what it is. That's just the truth of the matter. People can like that, they can not like that. But Crawford does not have a Floyd Mayweather Jr. or a Manny Pacquiao or a Canelo Alvarez type of resume. He just doesn't, and he's probably never going to. But that doesn't mean that he's not debatably the best fighter of his generation with what he's proved, especially against Errol Spence Jr., with what he's accomplished, and of course his dominance and skill set. So once again, Crawford definitely deserves to be mentioned in a lot of different conversations. But anyway, that's pretty much about it for today. Thank you all so much for watching. I'll talk to y'all later.